On behalf of everyone in the room, we acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia. We recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. So this panel is making your way upstream, the SVOD Superpanel. I wore red because I remember a doco I once saw on the ABC about the vegetables that are superfoods are always red or orange. I thought it would be good luck. There, ladies and gentlemen, is an example of the weird and wonderful way a human brain works. Go figure why audiences do what they do, I say. So I hope that all of you went to the Lauren Smith session this morning. She's in the room and I'd like to ask her to leave because it seems a little ridiculous that we're going to talk particularly about Netflix, but there's no Netflix person on the panel, but it is talking about Netflix and other SVODs from an Australian point of view. So I'm going to tell you more about the guests as we go, but I'm going to start with Tracy Robertson here beside me. Tracy owns Hoodlum with Nathan Mayfield. It's a company that's got 1 foot in Australia, specifically Brisbane, and 1 foot in LA, which is a bit unusual for an Australian company. And Tracy's office is on the Disney lot, and Hoodlum has an Emmy and a BAFTA for their efforts. And she's here particularly because of Tidelands, which is not just the first, but also the only Australian show that Netflix signed up for in advance with no other commissioners in sight. So we are going to play the trailer for Tidelands now, we hope.
You feel it too? Been away from the water for so long.
This place is enormous.
A lot of men are missing out there, don't
The shipwrecks, all the dead men, the tidelands, they're all connected.
Nothing is what I thought. Everything is a lie.
Leave the bay.
It's too late.
A lot of men go missing out there, don't they? That's my favourite line. And I was terrified that I wouldn't be in the later trailer, but it is. I think the whole marketing campaign should be around that, but anyway, what we're on. Tracy, can you give us a bit of a thumbnail sketch of what Tidelands is, though we've seen the trailer, of course, but when you shot it, where you shot it, over how long, that kind of thing?
Oh, okay. So Tidelands is set in the world of Tidelanders, who are half siren, half human. They live in a sleepy seaside village called Orphan Bay, which is set, it's a make-believe town in Queensland somewhere. And we shot it, we started on it in this year. We've been working on it all year, and it took us 4 months to shoot it, 4.5 months, and it's coming out on December the 14th, and it's 8 episodes.
So your business partner, Nathan Mayfield, once said to me that the fact that Tidelands got up with Netflix shows that if you're passionate about a show, it's never dead, because it has had a long journey through various partners, potential partners, government agencies. Can you just tell us quickly
7 long years. It was a show that we developed with Steve Irwin before we did Secrets and Lies. It was one that came about then, and we didn't really see a market for it in Australia. We didn't know really how to how to sell it in Australia. And so we were at the very beginning of, I was moving to the States, and we managed to sell it with an SVOD platform that developed it, and and it was one of the very, very early things that they developed. And then we developed it for a year, and then after a year they passed on it. And it was a project that we had that I was very determined I was going to sell it, and I think it went everywhere until a year ago, almost a year ago actually to the day, when I had, a couple of years ago to the day, when I met with Kelly Luganbeal from Netflix, who we'd known for many years, and she'd bought other things from us when she was in her previous job at ABC. So we had a relationship with Kelly, and she and we kept seeing each other, and she said to me, I'm looking for a show from Australia. And I said, well, I've got this show called Tidelands, but it's been everywhere. And she said, we don't mind. And I pitched it to her, and she went, love it. And I think they bought it about a week later.
I know you can't speak for Netflix, so this is a bit awkward, but what's your perception of why they took Tidelands on?
I think that it was a show that really thought big. It's a big idea. It's a very ambitious show. It sets up a world that is not been seen before. And it also was a show being set in Australia and being set in Queensland. It was a show that actually showed a world that hadn't been seen before. And I think that was really exciting for them to open up. And it had a mythology that we had created from scratch. It had, it was centred around female characters, which was very timely that we were doing something. And in the siren space, which at the time there wasn't, there is another show now that's set in the siren space, but there wasn't anything like that. And it was very sexy, and, they liked it.
And do you feel like the expectations of everyone in this room for the relationship between Australia and Netflix is now resting on your shoulders?
Pretty much. Don't fuck it up.
But seriously, I mentioned first that you do have an office in LA, that you live there. And you said that this in part came out of relationship, existing relationship.
Yeah.
So, how much does it help that LA office is there? It's a hard thing to try and talk about because a lot of people in the room don't have that. But can you talk around that?
Look, I think when I moved there 5 years ago, the industry's moved very, very fast, and I think now particularly in the US, everybody, and I will say because of Netflix looking outside of the US, it's opened up other opportunities for people to look outside of the US, and because there's so much television being made, they're looking for new voices, and so everybody is scouring the world for new voices and new worlds that we haven't seen. But when I first went there, that was not the case, and so it has changed drastically in that time. But also, when I first went there, we had a network, but we didn't have a really strong network of people, and now we have a really strong network of people, so we can generally, get to someone. And that is really helpful. But I do think now, there's always plenty of people scouring the world for new voices and new show ideas.
You mentioned to me that the show is going to be marketed in particular here, not surprisingly, and in Spain and Brazil. Why is that?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I actually don't know the big marketing campaign, so I can't even answer that. I know that we're doing a lot of marketing here, and two of our cast are quite well-known actors. One is a Spanish actor and one is a Brazilian actor, and so they have quite a big following in those countries. So I know that there is some publicity that we're doing with those cast members in their particular hometowns, but I don't really know the full extent of the marketing campaign.
Yeah. We started late, so let's just move on to Pine Gap, and I'm sure I'll come back to you with things. So Greg Hadrick was the showrunner on Pine Gap, and Matt King was the director of all 6 episodes of that show. We have a trailer, and if we could show the trailer, that would be grand.
Fingers crossed, yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Not only to the safety of both the United States and Australia, but also to the alliance between us.
I got something. This is Upstream. I announced 7:15 missile. Any comments on a possible target? ID on the aircraft.
Yes, sir.
The suspected target is a civilian aircraft. That's not going
Who were the attackers? Who was their target? I'm not sure.
We have to know what really happened and why. And the Australians, they know.
Nothing must save these walls. I just want to understand.
I want you all to understand. Reveal their secrets and protect it ours.
You two seem to be getting along lately. Friends? Well, stay friends might suit all of us.
The Americans are deeply loyal to their country, and the loyalty will always come first. Perfect honesty is a myth. There's always secrets.
So Greg is from Rainfall Creations, and it's a company that has absolutely no track record, and it's won absolutely no awards. But I hasten to add, it's only because it's a brand spanking new company. And I'd say watch this space, because Greg, of course, has been with Screen Time, kicking a lot of runs on Australian shows, so many great shows, Janet King and Underbelly and Mary Bryant and MDA. As I mentioned, Matt directed all 6 eps of Pine Gap, and he's an Aussie who's worked extensively in the UK, including on Doctor Who and on Law and Order UK and other things. And down here, he's done episodes of Wentworth, The Wrong Girl, Underbelly, House Husbands, Miss Fisher's Murder Mysteries, and currently at the moment working for Stan on Bloom. So Greg, I'm going to start with you. You talked about, well actually first I'll just point out again, or for the first time, I can't remember. Tidelands was a commission just by Netflix. Pine Gap's quite different because it was a commission by Netflix and the ABC. So, Greg, if you can start by just telling us how that co-commission arrangement came about.
Sure, and there's a lot of crossover in the, or parallels in the story between Tidelands and Pine Gap. Because we started 4 years ago, not quite 7, but it was 4. And the ABC, after Anzac Girls, they asked Felicity and I, what show we wanted to do next. She was the writer on Anzac Girls and the co-writer on Pine Gap. And we wanted to do this sort of idea for a long time, about the intelligence community, about the nature of trust and loyalty in relationships at a personal level, a managerial level and a global level. So we wrote the first drafts of EPs 1 and 2 and had an outline of the story. And the ABC quite rightly looked at it and went, this is a bit expensive. And we went, well, if you're going to tell the story properly about that base, and the base is huge, and the operations floor, the real operations floor has a surface area bigger than the MCG. So even though our set didn't have that, we wanted scale, needed to shoot in Alice Springs with all the costs that entails. So the ABC said, look, we love the show, but can you find an international partner who has the sort of money and clout to come with that? So the next 2 or 3 years, but stop-start, going to America, and the world has changed a lot in that 4 years. When we began, I think House of Cards had only just come out, or maybe not, so Netflix was new in the original space. We were talking more to Pivot, DirecTV, AMC, those sort of people, all of whom were interested in the idea, the notion that often I would pitch the show and they'd be Googling their phone at the same time and go, holy fuck, it's real. And I went, yeah, it's there. There's 2,000 Americans living in Alice Springs. And they went, what? So there's this, the idea of a true community of Americans in an exotic environment grabbed them. The issue was, for 2 or 3 years, not many of them at that point had seen much Australian drama, and the idea that they were going to spend millions of dollars making a show 12,000 miles away with who, and didn't really, they were tempted, pulled back, which was getting frustrating. And then the story of this show is that I had an email totally out of the blue from Elizabeth Bradley at Netflix. And the difference between Elizabeth and a lot of those other end users in America was she began by saying, I've just watched Underbelly, Janet King, Cloud Street, and I like the stuff you do. Is there anything we can work together on?
Nice work.
So I wrote back one of my longer emails because I got frustrated after 3 years and said, yes, there is. Here's 2 scripts and here's the budget and here's the outline, here's what we're doing. And I said, have I sent you too much? Because, I'm used to networks here. Just give me a page or 2 pages. And I said, yeah, there it is. And she took her about 6-8 weeks because they got an inbox like that, and then emailed back and said, can we have a call about this? And at the time, I actually had a detached retina. So the first call with Netflix, and you've got to stay flat on your stomach for 23 hours a day when you've got a detached retina when you're recovering. So I was on a massage table with a phone underneath the mouthpiece, trying to pretend I was in an office somewhere being professional in my first call with Netflix. But there were 3 calls that week, and then the story's a little similar to Tracy's. We talked a lot about the creative vision. What did you want to achieve? How are you going to achieve it? And the yes was very quick. Once they said, then they went away and said, the ABC was always there, by the way. They always knew that it was always going to be a co-commission with the ABC. So their first question was, what's the ABC's involvement? How much are they putting up? And then their question was, well, what do you need from us to actually make the show? At which point I went straight into Australian mode and went, well, we could bring the shoot down a little bit there. We don't need as many extras in that, and we don't need this location. And they went, no, you've sold us that vision. What do you need from us to make that?
What was the advantage of having a local broadcaster on board too? The advantages and the disadvantages? This is another way of saying, would you have liked to dump the ABC?
No, look, at the end of the day, I'm Australian wanting to make shows in Australia for the world. And you'd like to think we're all in this together. And so, partnerships can be work really well for shows that want to have that aspiration. And I think we're a bit like the Earth and the Moon. One's slightly bigger than the other, but you need each other to stay in orbit.
But Netflix gets all the fuss in this market because they're here. Would you hesitate signing with someone who doesn't have a presence in Australia that's an international SVOD?
No. Both are equally valid pathways to go down. It doesn't mean I'm going to abandon that to do that, but I'd do it.
Yeah. You, on the phone to me last week, you talked about the difference between what Australian broadcasters in general want and what Netflix want. And I like the way you said it. Can you repeat it here?
I think what I said, and then stop me if I think what I said was that generally speaking, the free-to-airs in Australia, their remit is to attract the biggest audience they can. And that is their aim. So when they're looking at a show and looking at a creative vision, they're looking at how many eyeballs, how big can our ratings be, how many people will enjoy this show. Whereas what I got from Netflix was that they were looking at their, whatever it is, 120, 30, 40 million members, and going, we love this show, we know that there's X number of people that really appreciate that genre, and we want to actually give them the shows that they like. So I can't speak entirely for Netflix, but my understanding and what I got from them was, we're not necessarily after the most number, can we get 100 or 130 million watching it? But the 15 million who really love these sort of political spy thrillers, if they all watch the show and watch it through, then it's worked for them and we've done a good show for our members. So they're different different remits between the two.
So taking this further and bearing in mind who the audience is, what does this mean for what can be pitched?
I think you don't have to. You don't have to try and. I don't want to sound. Yeah, this is meant to be pejorative, but you don't have to sort of broaden the idea out to try and make it appeal to a wider demographic or a wider this or a wider that. You can concentrate on the idea and the creative vision you want to tell. And what I am finding, post Pine Gap, going back with ideas to the SVODs, is that they will rarely say, you know what, if you could just change that character and change this storyline, then actually it might reach a bigger number of people. Because they're less interested in trying to massage your creative vision than hear what story you want to tell, and then they'll go away and go, now that story, does that fit? Do we know how many subscribers or members we have that would like that story? And if the maths add up, then they'll come back and go, yeah.
Yeah. There's so much talk at this conference about all these new opportunities. When you meet reluctance in the US to make films here for the global market, what is that reluctance usually based on?
As I said, it's changing. Like what it was 2 or 3 years ago is not what it is now. I'm not sure there is the reluctance now that there was. I think it used to be distance. There used to be a perception when you spoke to distributors overseas, particularly in the UK, and you asked them point blank the reputation of Australian drama. Most of our drama, to be honest, even things that sell into 50, 60, 70 territories, going down the traditional path, would usually be afternoon or late night. It was very rarely prime time. So there was this sense that, from the international distributors, that it was good B-grade English language drama. And occasionally you'd get one that popped, like The Slap did, like Underbelly did, etc.
Yeah.
And I think that's changing. The better we become at actually trying to make individual ideas and individual stories, the more we're respected internationally for that as well.
Yeah. Matt, how much pre did you have? How long was the shoot? Was all that usual or unusual compared to an Aussie show?
We had more pre than I was probably used to. I think I had about 10 or 12 weeks. But for me, the best thing about this show and sort of doing all 6 was that Greg and Felicity had written all of those 6 drafts early on. So what I got at the beginning of pre to what I went to set with didn't change by much, by very little. It was dialogue tweaks and really maybe 1 or 2 scenes. So I went in very prepared. But overall, what was great about it, I think what Greg was talking about, is that we were just making a show where we could just drill down on what we thought the audience was and what they wanted. So we never were getting notes about broadening it out, which was fantastic. So for me, there was just that big prep time to prepare for what is a complicated plot, and trying to know that when I shot it, I'd be shooting all 6 episodes at once across 52, 51 days, and I'd have to just have that story in my head, because on any one day I could be shooting from all 6 episodes, and that was the biggest challenge, was containing a complicated story in my head that on any one day I'd know from scene to scene what was happening.
I mean, as Greg said, a lot of our stuff is sold as acquisitions afterwards, but did you have to think about it differently, or indeed did you think about it differently in that it was going out to a global audience?
We certainly came up with a look that we were all agreed on. That was the biggest thing, of planning a look and all being on board with that. But other than that, for me, it was a pretty normal production, just all 6 episodes, that amount of story, and realising we wanted to look at as big as possible. So I think for me, I probably did more location scouting up in Alice than I've done in any job. Driving right out and finding the right sort of terrains to sell the landscapes that we had up there, without being stuck within Alice Springs. For me, there's a lot of planning, more than you usually get time to do on a normal pre-production in Australia.
Because you said it was the most satisfying gig you've ever done. Is that why?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it was all 6, and because Netflix just sort of gave us that creative freedom. I pitched my visual style when I was up for the job, And everyone was very supportive from that point. So for me, there was a relative freedom on set. You know, in post-production we all came together again, and in pre-production we were all together discussing it. But once we started shooting, Netflix saw the rushes, ABC saw the rushes and said, they look great, go for it. And had the support of Greg and Lisa and Felicity, and they were there for story. But for me, it was the shoot was a slow marathon. You know, it was a big task, but it was fun and creative, and we were just trying to paint the biggest, you know, scope of landscapes and even interior landscapes, building these huge sets where we could just kind of shoot interior landscape wide shots. It was, you know, really exciting. So it was a real satisfying thing all round.
Greg, why did you hire Matt?
Because of that vision. He'd done an episode of Razor, Underbelly Razor for us, which had a lot of energy, had a lot of visual power, and his frames tend to be packed with interesting things, rather than a sort of standard frame like that. So the idea of a show which was trying to say that if you think about it and look closely, you'll see lots of other things in it. You needed someone who was going to be thinking about that with every frame that he did, and that was the way he approached the script, so it seemed a good fit.
Yeah.
And we tried to shoot it in a way that it was a planned shoot, where we weren't just trying to rattle off a scene and cover it for the sake of it, because we were always up against time, but we didn't want to let time dictate how we shot it. We wanted to go the other way around.
Yeah. Greg, I know that you're contractually unable to talk budget, but can you contextualise budget somehow?
Look, it was small by American standards and big by Australian standards. Yeah, and if you said it was nearly double the Janet King budget, you wouldn't be more than 10-15% out. But that didn't go. I hasten to add that didn't go in bigger fees for everybody on it. It was because of the shoot in Alice Springs. The accommodation per diems, all the location fees you had to pay up there, which are sort of more complicated things to work out. The CGI was huge.
And the sets as well.
And the sets was huge. We had 165 monitors, which we all had to buy, all of them, things like that. So that's where the budget went. And you could have done a normal Australian budget for it, and the whole thing would have come right down in size, and you couldn't have told the story properly. The story which, you know, there's one strand of that story which is, you know, American China falling out at an APEC conference, and just happened.
Yeah. And am I right that Netflix shows are debt financed?
Yeah.
Greg and Tracy, that's a question for. Or can you tell us anything about the deals?
Again, not in detail. But no, I don't think that's a huge secret for most of the people sitting in this room. But that was, thanks for your kind words about the great track record of Rainfall Creations earlier. But Screen Time do have. I mean, they are a production company with a long-standing relationship with various financial organisations, so they could manage that side of things. It is at the end of the day a Screen Time production.
Yeah. Time is racing along, so I'm going to move on to the agency heads. So furthest from me is Tracy Vieira, boss of Screen Queensland for the last 4 years. Way back when, she was also manager of locations and international production at Screen Queensland, but then went to LA for Ozfilm and has spent a decade pushing US production into Australia in the nicest possible way, I mean. And by the way, Tracy's colleague Joe Dillon is who produced this session. And next to Tracy is Courtney Gibson, boss of the South Australian Film Corporation for the last 8 months. She was previously head of Screen New South Wales. She commissioned a lot of ABC TV, arts and comedy, and she's also worked for Southern Star, Network 9 and Jungle. So you two, in a way I'd say, but maybe shop for, the screen agencies have more functions than Screen Australia. Like there's a lot of bits you have to answer, and one of them is just stimulating production activity in your state. And Screen Australia's budget's reducing, and the networks here aren't exactly known for deep pockets, but we've got the producer offset. But my first question to both of you is, what can be done to get more SVOD-driven Aussie TV here from a state agency perspective? Who wants to start?
I can start. I'm happy to say. I think that one of the things is just understanding the kind of content that they're responding to, the complexity that they're looking for within the stories, whether that be through location and characters, the ability for things to go more than one season, what that looks like, you know, long term down the road, and how those characters can be developed, and the way that they can resonate globally, because it is in 190 countries, and they are very, as Greg pointed out, focused on their members, and their members are their viewers. So whether, you know, it's the niche part of that membership, or where that fits around the world and the sorts of things they're looking for, I think that they've absolutely changed the way, even in this short time in Australia, in terms of how we respond to international content. That you can sit down and watch a show that once upon a time would have been formatted for and made in a different country. Like, for example, we've had shows, Australian shows, that have gone to the US and been made as US shows. I think a lot of that's going away because Netflix, essentially through our viewing, have enabled us to really accept different accents and accept, you know, that you can have characters like in Tidelands that are from multiple countries, and it's about the complexity of that story. So I think it's understanding the kinds of content that are really working on those platforms, and making sure we're thinking really big. Exactly, again, as Greg said, it is not necessarily about containing your model, because we're always so short on our budgets, or how hard it is to raise that funding, that it is that big vision and pushing it creatively into what it can be best creatively, and that's what's resonating.
And there's two good examples here, I think, in, Tidelands, which is, I love these conversations. Have you got anything in the siren space? Oh, yeah, actually, we need something in the siren space. You know, we have a siren space now. So that entirely dystopian, otherworldly project, and then something that's, that what makes Pine Gap so great is what the Americans discovering, it's real. This place really exists. This totally organic hotbed for drama is a real place, and they're both two very relevant, interesting spaces for producers to think about. And I think, for us, and you've got your studios, you've got Brisbane studios coming, we've got our studios in South Australia. That's what kind of made Pine Gap makeable in a lot of ways, because of that world you created. Every square inch of that 1,000 square metre space was cut, like a real world. Stairs, lifts. I'm trying to get into the lift, not realising it's an art department lift. The whole thing was a sort of a walk around, shoot around space. So I guess, it is always about looking to, if you are rolling out a program and it has to resonate in every territory, what does that look like? I think as Australians, what we always we tend to go, I've got this great idea, I'll pitch it to Netflix. I've got this great idea, maybe it could be something for Apple. Flip it around and look at what Apple are planning. Look at what YouTube are doing in terms of their half hours and so on. Forensically study what Amazon, Netflix, look at who Amazon have signed, look who Apple have signed. Oprah, Sesame Street, J.J. Abrams, if you look at what they're doing, you look at what YouTube are doing with their half hours and their comedies, Netflix with their sci-fi, Amazon with their drama, and tailor-make something for those specific outputs, I think, rather than always be, I've got this show, where can I take it?
Interestingly, in my conversations with Netflix executives, it has been very much their desire to see Australian stories, but they want really good, bold, complex Australian stories that will resonate beyond Australia. So it's not, like in the past it used to be, how will it work for an American audience, and can we sort of shape this creatively to be American? That is not a single conversation I've ever had. It has been very much really great Australian stories that they're looking for that will resonate globally.
And regional shoots. And I think one interesting factor in where Tidelands has got one buyer, so you're honouring that one buyer. We're very used in Australia to having a primary buyer in Australia and then having a secondary buyer in the international market. And you tend to honour the local buyer. When you have a global buyer, who's the audience that you're thinking about? And I think it means you probably, audience sort of recedes and you're really just focusing on getting the very best out of the story and you're almost blind to audience. Is that how you felt with Tidelands?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm just going to ask Courtney and Tracy a few more questions, and then we're going to open it to the floor for the last 10 minutes. If I can have the roving mics, that would be fabulous. You have talked very much in terms of the creative, but I wonder whether you're changing policies or changing your strategic vision in order to capture these new opportunities. And one of the reasons I say that is because Screen Australia, at the moment anyway, doesn't put money into Netflix series. So actually, maybe we can start this question by asking how much you put into Tidelands.
Actually, I'm glad you've asked this question because one of the things as a state, like from a Queensland perspective, we've focused really hard since I've come on board around being screen agnostic and understanding that the world had changed. And as you mentioned, I was in the US for 10 years prior. And when I moved here, we didn't have Netflix. And at that point, I had a 3-year-old who saw a commercial on television for the first time because he'd only ever seen Netflix. You know, that was how he was watching content. And so sort of, I guess, seeing that come in and understanding how quickly the world's changing, we've really moved in Queensland fast to really embrace all of the emerging technologies. You know, we did the first, Courtney and I announced the first VR projects in Australia on the same day. In terms of doing something with the national broadcaster, which we did with SBS. So we've been really focused on that. And one of the really big things for me was when I first arrived back in Australia and I went and met, and I don't know if there's commercial broadcasters in the room, but I remember going and meeting with the commercial broadcasters who explained to me why they could never shoot drama in Queensland because somehow creative talent finished at the border. And you know, anyone with any talent would be in Sydney. And so that was a really difficult conversation for me. And it's changed over time, but part of that is by us looking globally and not just looking in Australia in terms of working with our creatives to actually have creative vision that could go global rather than just trying to break in against the more established players in Sydney and Melbourne. What that has done is when we have conversations with Netflix or Amazon, they don't look at Australia and see borders. They're just really interested in the ideas. They're interested in what creatively is a great story that's going to resonate with their members. And so in many ways, we've had more success looking outwards to the rest of the world than we have within Australia. But that success has now brought the other broadcasters to our door going, hey, what can we do with you? And of course, we're open to that too. So that has very much been our approach, and I can't tell you what we put into Tidelands. But I do want to comment, I know that you probably mentioned why you wore that jacket, because I actually looked at you and thought, how fantastic that you're wearing the Netflix corporate colours today.
Just shows how much you're in the Netflix office compared to me. Is there any questions from the floor? We apparently have 2 roving mics. There's one, a woman on the edge.
Hi, I'm Bobby Lee from Drama Queen Productions. My question is, with a co-commission between ABC and Netflix, what does the windows look like?
I'm busy trying to remember the contracts to think what I can say and not say. I think the short position is ABC had world premiere. Netflix are able to put it up outside Australia around the world. Well, they've just announced December 7th. So it'll be up everywhere else on December 7th except Australia. And
Is
I
that
think
3 months later then, or not quite that?
it's not. I think they could have put it up early.
Right.
My understanding was they wanted House of Cards in November, clear window, and then strategy choice to make it December 7th, and it's also the anniversary of Pearl Harbor, which is where American politics engage with Asia.
Yeah.
And then it's on Netflix in Australia 6 months after the ABC broadcast. That's the window.
Cargo too, just as another example, because they took rest of world. It did its theatrical in Australia May 18, day and date, Netflix globally outside Australia, and it's just gone to Netflix Australia last week.
And can I say, my kids were 28, 25 and 23, and I talked to a lot of their kids' parties, and And they say, we'll watch it when it comes on Netflix. And I'm going, it's on the ABC now. It's on iView now. And they go, yeah, we know. We'll see it when it gets on Netflix. And you go...
But then there's the other whole market.
There's a whole other market, I know.
Just watching Netflix, yeah.
I don't know what I think about that. Questions? Any questions from the floor? Yes. Hold on, just a sec.
Hi, I have a question. You mentioned, I think one of the other Thailand's is 8-part, and I just wondered that often in the UK they say we make 6 parts, and traditionally Australia's made 6-part television series. Has that expanded to 8? Has it expanded beyond that? Can a series be any length now, or what?
I think the position of our local broadcasters is different from the international SVODs. Everything I've always heard from the international SVODs is, you tell us, how long is your story? It is really story driven. That's why with the earlier conversation, the old phrase here, you can shoot the scripts or you can shoot the budget. And for a long time, Australian drama, too often, not all the time, shot the budget, and the story would be changed to fit the budget. Whereas what we're dealing with in this world is, if the partnership are both excited about the show, then you shoot the scripts, whether that's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, doesn't matter.
Ours was actually more about timing. It was originally 10 and we made it 8 because we had to get it out in December, so we could only produce the 8 in time.
Questions? It's a bit of baton passing going up the back, but we'll get there.
Thank you. A great panel, really enjoying it. I just want to ask about debt finance and just that structure and how maybe as a small independent production company one can work with that sort of financing structure with Netflix.
Is that directed at anyone?
Well, I suppose it's Tracy and Greg.
Well,
just to get a better understanding of how the debt finance structure works.
Yep.
And the implications for a small production company.
You need a friendly bank.
Yeah.
Literally, there's a big chunk of the budget that you will have to borrow up front. The interest from that can all go into the budget. So it means the relationship you have, or you need to find a finance facility like Fulcrum or something like that.
We didn't have that. Netflix financed our production, so we didn't have to finance the budget. Apart from
Whereas
Offset, which was quite normal in Australian productions, so we didn't have that same challenge.
Is that a typical Netflix structure? Like there's 2 different financing structures in?
I think that's a question for Netflix.
Netflix is sitting in the row in
Yeah.
front of you, so you can ask them. That's the deal that we did with them. I mean, we're a small company and a big budget, so they paid for the production, and we did finance the offset, which is quite normal, and any kind of rebate that we were going for. But apart from that, they financed our production.
I'm not even sure that you should anticipate that models stay the same. It could be evolving as we talk.
Thank you.
Is there a couple of lucky last questions at the back?
Hi, I was just wondering if there was any tension between the obligations on financing the offset on the creative vision, so producing for a global platform, but there are obviously requirements for the offset. Is there any tension there?
Creatively, no, none whatsoever.
And certainly not for us.
No.
No, because they're all creatively Australian.
Yeah, we had, in terms of that, we easily met the requirements for producer offset. Screen Time's an Australian production company. It was written by 2 Australians, directed by an Australian. There was the American presence was actually very small. There was Parker Sawyer is the only American-born actor in it. Interestingly, some people always knock American accents. They go, "Oh, terrible American accents," and you go, "Well, there are executives in Los Angeles who watched everything and thought they were American." But in terms of, it's very much an Australian show, so there was no issue with the offset.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just curious about how do you see the bridge between the domestic free-to-airs and the global video on demand in terms of they seem to have slightly different requirements and objectives. You touched on it before, Greg. Just a little bit.
Yes. Look, I don't have a clear view. I think it is going to be, the world will change a lot in the next 3 or 4 years. I think basically that difference between our commercial free-to-airs and even the ABC, whose charter is to try and reach, the biggest audience they can, it'll be an issue ongoing in terms of then having co-productions with international end users whose task or whose remit is different. I think it'll just make it. Plus, a lot of, and we've touched on this too, you touched on this, that there's an increasing number of viewers under the age of 35, and you see it in the ratings, who don't actually watch much free-to-air drama. They do consume it via Netflix or Stan or Amazon or whatever. And the impact that will have on 7, 9, 10 and the ABC is a question mark for me. I just think that if we're sitting here thinking that how it's been for the last 15, 20 years, it'll just continue, I don't think it's true. But what it will look like, I don't know.
And that younger audience that's already there on YouTube, they will watch YouTube premium shows. They will watch all of those half-hour comedies in the main that YouTube will be rolling out. And I think just that, the blurring of those lines between social media and content streaming platform, just as the channels, the free-to-air channels have got their kind of social apps and so forth while you're watching their shows.
Having said that, the experience with Pine Gap was terrific from both. There was a lot of mutual respect between Netflix and the ABC, and it wasn't one of those co-production hills. It was actually a really great collaboration, and so you would assume that if it can be a great collaboration like that, there's no reason why it can't continue.
And it enables the ABC to do more drama effectively.
Oh, much.
A lot more.
Yeah.
Which is great.
And I would have thought that there's some, maturing's the wrong word, but, to get a broad audience, surely local taste is becoming edgier and bolder as well. Like, do you get what I mean? That the two tastes of the way you spelled it out, I really like, but do you get what I mean?
No.
Well, audience taste is shifting because of the SVOD.
Well, it is.
So to get a broad audience, you probably have to be edgier now.
You actually almost have to
get
think.
the deep niche.
Yeah.
That's what you want, the deep niche.
I don't know, yesterday there was niche is the new universal, which just did my head in. But anyway, you've been a very patient audience because we bumbled the start, but please thank our panel, and I hope you got something great out of it. Thank you.